everyone. My name is Dr. Cindy Gilson, and I will be your presenter today to talk about creative problem seeking and solving for gifted learners, one of my favorite topics of all time. I've used the creative problem solving, or CPS model, as an elementary teacher with gifted students, and I also have years of experience guiding teachers to develop their very own CPS-based lesson plans. What I've learned is that when given the opportunity, students of all ages can utilize their gifts and talents to accomplish amazing feats. As your student's gatekeeper, you can empower them to tackle personal, local, and global challenges that are in need of creative solutions. So let's get started on this overview of the creative problem-solving process and 5 strategies to cultivate your students' creative problem-seeking skills. Any of the CPS-related resources that I created are located in a Google Drive folder. On the screen is the link. You are welcome to download and share any of those resources with your colleagues. To begin, let's think about this question. Why should we develop students' creative problem-solving and seeking skills using a creative problem-solving process? First, it can help enhance students' analytic and creative thinking skills. Thinking creatively is often a matter of perspective, as illustrated in this cartoon. Importantly, creative problem seeking and solving can be a lot of fun. Pause for a moment to think about the consequences of not celebrating, honoring, and promoting student creativity and problem solving. It would likely result in a pretty boring experience like these zombie-looking students from Dreary Town, which is, if you're not familiar with it, a fictional place in a Dr. Seuss book called Hooray for Different Doofer Day. Teaching creative problem solving and seeking can empower your students to apply their gifts and talents to worthwhile causes. On the screen, we see problem-solving role models for your students, such as William Kamkwamba, who harnessed the wind as a source of electricity for his village during a terrible famine. Then there is Greta Thunberg, a fearless climate change activist and leader who is also twice exceptional. On the bottom left is Allison, Krithik, and Rachel. These smiling high schoolers are rejoicing in their triumphs at the 2019 Intel ISEF competition. Your students don't have to become famous to apply their gifts and talents for good. Even simple acts of kindness can serve as a solution to a problem. In Kaufman and Beghetto's 2009 4C model of creativity, they delineate 4 types of creativity, which I love because it helps me and teachers think about small and big ways kids can realistically be creative. This is not to say we should lower expectations for children's effort and quality of work. Rather, a child's idea or problem-solving approach might be judged to be original and new for the individual child, even if it is not so by the standards of the larger society. The model includes mini-C, or interpretive creativity, such as a 2nd grade student's new insight about how to solve a math problem. The next one is little c, or everyday creativity, and an example might include a 10th grade social studies class, developing an original project that combines learning about a key historical event with gathering local histories from community elders. Then there is Pro-C, or expert creativity. For example, the concept of the flipped classroom pioneered by teachers Aaron Sams and Jonathan Bergman. Then Big C, or legendary creativity. An example would include Maria Montessori's new approach to early childhood education. So the creative problem-solving model that I will discuss today can provide your students with the logical process to identify a messy or ill-defined problem and then arrive at a creative, innovative, or effective solution. Importantly, balancing the ability to define a problem and to resolve it can also be important to the emotional health of students. For example, it can help them more effectively deal with stress. Students feel empowered when they are given the opportunity to seek out their own problems to resolve, so long as they are also being supported by their teachers. Noteworthy is that if a person is better at identifying problems than working towards solutions, quote, it could result in some cognitive incongruency and may produce some negative consequences. This may be especially true for students who are very sensitive to social concerns or those who have a deep sense of empathy for others, resulting in a keen ability to identify problems. If these students lack the corresponding skills for resolving these issues, it may lead to feelings of distress and helplessness. Therefore, it's really essential for educators to teach students both problem-seeking and problem-solving skills while supporting them through the process. Creative problem seeking and solving is great because you can do this in any grade level or subject area. On the screen are 8 examples, so pause the video and think about which ones might apply to your particular teaching role. Additionally, many aspects of creative problem seeking and solving align to the 2019 NAGC Gifted Programming Standards, and I found at least one evidence-based practice within all 6 of the standards. This can help you justify infusing the strategies I will discuss today into your curriculum. So I just presented a number of reasons why this topic is important. Take a short reflection break and jot down one major takeaway from the presentation so far. To deepen your reflection, consider this question. How would you convince your administrator or curriculum team to use the creative problem-solving model at your school or grade level? In the second portion of the session, we will explore the procedural steps of the CPS model, which will contextualize the problem-seeking strategies that I will share later in the session. Now, historically, there have been a number of approaches and models to solving problems creatively. The one that I have used the most with gifted students, and then I teach my graduate gifted education students, is from the Creative Education Foundation, which has been around for over 50 years. Their CPS model was originally developed by Alex Osborne and Sydney Parnes and has gone through a number of revisions. Here's the current version of the process. There are 4 major stages, and within each stage there are 1 or more steps, which I will describe in a minute. Embedded in the CPS model are different types of thinking skills. As this quote suggests, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them, so we need to teach students how to think in different ways. Treffinger and Isaacson, 2005, explained that creative thinking includes making and expressing meaningful new connections. During this kind of thinking, you may perceive gaps, challenges, or concerns. Think of the many varied or unusual possibilities, or elaborate and extend alternatives. Other examples of creative thinking skills include fluent, flexible, and original thinking, and the ability to elaborate one's ideas. Treffinger and Isaacson also describe critical thinking as analyzing, evaluating, or developing options. During critical thinking, you screen, select, and support possibilities, compare and contrast options, make inferences and deductions, and improve or refine alternatives in order to make effective judgments and decisions. Other examples of critical thinking skills would include determining missing information and identifying fact versus opinion. These skills would be valuable during the initial steps of the CPS model as students research relevant information about the issue or problem they are attempting to understand and then resolve. 2 specific types of thinking skills in the CPS model include convergent and divergent thinking, which are used at all stages. Here's a handy image to help you and your students distinguish between the 2. Notice the direction of the arrows. During divergent thinking, they generate a number of different ideas, options, questions, solutions, answers, or criteria for evaluation. Whereas during convergent thinking, students converge upon or select just one idea or answer. In the Creative Education Foundation's version of the CPS, the problem-seeking step resides in the clarify stage. In this stage, students identify and define the problem they want to solve. There are 3 steps in this phase. The first one is explore the vision, where students begin to be aware of a challenge, issue, or problem or mess that needs a solution. Interestingly, research indicates that students who are more knowledgeable about a particular topic or issue are more likely to recognize a problem related to that topic. The gather data step is the data finding or fact-finding step. Problem solver gathers facts from a variety of resources to organize their understanding about the problem from step 1. They also consider what they already know about the mess, and this step is very essential to build students' backgrounds. Formulate challenges. In this problem-defining step, students sharpen awareness of the challenge and create challenge questions that invite solutions. At this step, the problem solver recognizes the number of problems that are related to the mess. This is also the step in which problem solvers must select a problem to solve and then clearly define or state the challenge they want to address in the form of a question. For example, instead of saying, homelessness is a major problem, a student might formulate the challenge more specifically by saying, How can I or we help homeless people gain access to nice clothes to wear for a job interview? Framing it in that type of question leads to more self-efficacy for solving it. So all these steps here combined are part of what problem seekers do. Depending on how students define their problems, it may lead to different paths for a solution. For instance, one of my former students brainstormed the following problem statements for an invention convention. Really bothers me when I sleep on the floor at night when I go to visit relatives in Japan. So I asked her to be more specific. So she came up with, it really bothers me when the sheets on my floor mat make loud rustling noises when I sleep at my relative's house in Japan. So I asked her, well, are there any other reasons why this is a problem? And she said, I sneeze a lot when I sleep on the floor at night when I go to visit relatives in Japan. So as you can see, these are similar problems. She can't sleep at night. Well, when she began to clearly define her problem, which would eventually turn into questions, she recognized that she actually had multiple problems that might require different types of solutions. Here is a problem-seeking matrix that I've used with many students, and it helps them to brainstorm possible problems utilizing divergent thinking skills, and it helps them narrow down their options by rating each idea that's listed here against a set of criteria listed in the top row. They rate each of those on a scale of 1 to 5. In essence, they're utilizing convergent thinking skills. So the problem idea with the largest total score is the winner. So this could help your indecisive students make a somewhat objective decision. In the ideate stage, students apply divergent thinking skills to brainstorm ideas or solutions to a selected problem. This is the only step in this stage, explore ideas. The problem solver generates multiple ideas, alternatives, and solutions without making any judgments. And this type of brainstorming is an example of divergent thinking. Here are some guidelines that you could teach your students about effective brainstorming so we won't squash their creativity. And they include defer judgment. Avoid making judgments about ideas in the divergent thinking phase. Combine and build. Use one idea to help spur other ideas, then build, combine, and improve those ideas. Seek wild ideas. Stretch your students' imagination to create wild ideas. While these ideas may not all work, allowing the students a way to think outside of the box gives them room to discover more extraordinary and interesting ideas. Go for quantity. This means take the time necessary to generate a substantial list of potential options. Scamper is a fun, creative brainstorming technique. Briefly, each letter of Scamper represents a question students could ask to arrive at a solution. For example, if something is not working, what could be substituted to make a better and more functional product? So check out the website link at the bottom of the screen to learn more about Scamper. In the develop stage, the students select an idea that might solve their problem. There's only one step in this stage as well, formulate solutions. So the problem solver brainstorms again by listing criteria for evaluating the ideas generated in the previous step. Then they apply these criteria to their brainstormed list and then evaluate and select which idea or solution to pursue. So that's convergent thinking. This step also involves improving their ideas from the previous step. To move from ideas to solutions, your students need to really evaluate, strengthen, and select solutions for best fit. For example, you might have students list criteria in a matrix again to evaluate each of their ideas, now these are the solutions, and pick the best one. I used this approach with my students and it was very helpful, especially for more indecisive students or students wanting to have some kind of structured framework. Implement is the last stage of the CPS model. It is where students put their idea into action. It involves both convergent and divergent thinking skills again, and students have to formulate a plan. In this step of the stage, the problem solver determines how they will implement their ideas or solutions. This means they should develop a sequence of steps to actually carry out their idea or solution. And there's a lot of different ways that students can jot down their ideas. You can be creative with this. They might list their steps in a chart, a timeline, Word document, Google Doc, etc. Again, I think that this could be another opportunity for more creative brainstorming. And also consideration of alternative strategies just in case their idea or solution does not work. At this stage, I would also recommend that students share their solutions with an expert to get some feedback. then revise, update, and share again with an authentic audience for some input from a larger group. For example, one high school student developed a manual for staying fit in between soccer seasons, and he presented his product to an authentic audience, which was the soccer coach and his teammates. Another gifted fifth grader of mine created a safer way to clean gutters and shared his prototype with students across 3 different grades and got feedback from them. We have reached the end of the second section of the session. Take a moment to reflect on what you have learned and consider thinking about these questions. How would you define a problem in need of the CPS model? What are some problems that are most important to your students? And what types of support would your students need to complete the CPS process? Now that you have some background knowledge about the CPS process, in this last portion of the session, I will share why I use the term problem seeking, why this is a particularly important step, and then we will end with 5 specific strategies on how to develop your students' creative problem-seeking skills. Many creativity experts have expressed that problem-seeking and problem-defining is often overshadowed by an overemphasis on brainstorming solutions to problems. It is a disservice to students to simply give them a problem to solve and rush to the brainstorming step. As fun and important as brainstorming solution is, your students must learn how to recognize a problem and clearly define it. So I'd like to call problem finding problem seeking instead. Like in Quidditch, the seeker has an important role of going after the golden snitch, which can be invigorating and fun. I call it problem seeking because it has more of a sense of urgency than problem finding. I think this is an appropriate alternative term, especially if we want to encourage students to become proactive leaders to tackle problems and issues that exist in our world today. Problem seeking also communicates to students that they can have ownership in actively identifying or seeking out a problem that they would like to solve, rather than waiting for the problem to just find them and bump them on the head. So recall that largely problem seeking occurs in the clarify stage. However, students should be on the lookout for mini problems within their solution design that they might need to resolve. So here are 5 strategies or mini lessons that you could do with your students to develop their problem-seeking skills. Strategy 1 involves teaching students the characteristics of real-world problems. You could show them examples and non-examples of problems that need the CPS model to resolve. Now, these objectives are appropriate for students at a wide range of readiness levels. To kick it up a notch for students who are ready for more of a challenge, you could infuse some modifications as recommended by Maker and Cheever. For example, you might adjust the challenge level of the examples and non-examples that you give to the students, make them more abstract, complex, or controversial, more current or global. Or you could use a process modification. For example, rather than providing the definition, have students locate and explore definitions of problems on their own to present to the class. Have them look for commonalities to create their own synthesized definition. So that involves discovery. Another option would be to provide examples of real-world problems first and have students infer a definition of a problem. So more of the onus of thinking is on the students. All right, so characteristics of real-world problems. What do these look like? First, a real-world problem must have a personal frame of reference since it involves an emotional or affective commitment as well as an intellectual or cognitive one. That helps with motivation. A real problem does not have an existing or unique solution that the student is aware of. Also, calling something a problem does not necessarily make it a real problem for a given person or group, so it's good to check with that group to see if it actually is a problem. And then the purpose of pursuing a real problem is to bring about some form of change and/or contribute something new to the sciences, the arts, or the humanities. So we want students to present what they've come up with to an authentic audience. Here's a non-example of a real-world problem. This is about George. George went to the store, bought a whole bunch of bananas, and then we'd follow that up with a question about, all right, well, how many does he have left? This is a really great math problem or a story problem. If you're curious, there's 247 left over, but this would not need the creative problem-solving process to solve. I think a better question, though, is why is he eating so many bananas? Once your students have a clear understanding of the characteristics of real-world problems, present them with examples of problems and ask them why they are real-world problems. So here's a list of 9 that you can explore. Building on this activity, strategy number 2 includes teaching students to classify real-world problems into categories. This will help them start to understand the nuances of real-world problems and develop their problem sensitivity or ability to recognize different types of real-world problems. 4 major categories include problems that affect students personally on an emotional or social level, within or outside of the home. Relatedly, problems very real to students might be related to their experiences at school or as a learner. More broadly speaking, problems can occur in local communities or at a global level. The types of problems you teach to your students should be aligned to what might be developmentally appropriate given their maturity levels. We don't want to stress them out too much. Getzels and Csikszentmihalyi describe 4 other types of problems that I think is really interesting for you to know about. The first is presented problems, which have a known method to solve them and a known solution. These are the types of problems students usually encounter on a math worksheet. Discovered problems are those that exist independently of the solver. These problems may or may not have a known formulation, known method, or solution, or known solution. Creative problems are interesting in that they are invented or defined by the solver. They arise out of an intentionality to either find or develop a new problem to solve. So this might be something that musicians or artists do when they want to create a new product. Similar to presented problems, well-defined or well-structured problems leave little room for students to independently develop the skills of seeking out and crafting a clear statement defining the problem. Lastly, with ill-defined or ill-structured problems, the problem solver has to make sense of a messy scenario by more clearly defining the problem. Because students with gifts and talents typically enjoy working with complex, real-world, and often ill-defined problems, these types of problems, when chosen thoughtfully, can increase student engagement in an otherwise less motivating curriculum. So something important to keep in mind. All right, so here's an activity. So again, instead of giving students the classification categories, you could apply the TABA concept development strategy. So students arrive at a generalization about problems. So this, in a way, they are accessing higher levels of thinking. The steps would include first defining the word problem so that if the students are working in groups, they're all on the same conceptual page. Next, they list as many different problems that they can think of in about 5 minutes. Then they look back at their list and classify the problems into as many unique categories as they can. Then they reclassify the problems into as few unique categories as possible, and then start again. They look at their list and classify the problems in a new way, and that helps build their creativity. Then you ask them, what generalization can you make about problems based on this activity? So they might come up with, problems come in many forms, or there are ones that affect us in different ways at a personal level, community, or global level. You could also modify this lesson, and instead of having students define the word problem, maybe their generalization could be a conceptual definition of the term. Here's a copy of a handout that I created to go along with this activity. Feel free to modify it as needed. An example is located in the Google Drive. All right, for strategy number 3, have your students learn about well-known problem solvers from diverse backgrounds and practice classifying the types of problems they solved. If you are teaching a subject area where students have time to read a biography in school or out, you might have students analyze the character traits and dispositions of problem solvers as well as determine how they found problems to solve. If you teach science, let them read about scientists. Or if you teach math, allow them to read about mathematicians. This could be a great anchor activity too if they finish their work early. So on the screen are some questions that you might ask your students. The last one here is essential to help students apply what they've learned to their own problem-solving project. What can you learn from these individuals to help you develop your own problem-solving skills? As I mentioned previously, these lessons could be applied at any grade level, which is awesome. If you have your class or a group of students analyze individual problem solvers, you could have them analyze patterns or commonalities and differences across those problem solvers. And this could easily align to one of the ELA Common Core State Standards, which I've pasted here on the slides for grades 1, 5, and 8. And that way you can see how this type of lesson could be adapted for any grade level. For strategy number 4, teach students to develop their observational skills. Allow them to practice observing their 5 senses to identify a problem. To differentiate for a range of learners, you might adjust the level of scaffolding and pacing. Now, according to Stephen Covey, who is a well-known motivational speaker, highly effective problem solvers spend an inordinate amount of time and energy listening. I don't know about you, but it seems as if many adults and our students are so plugged into technology, I wonder how connected they are to the environments in which they live. How often do we truly listen to each other? How often do we go for a walk and observe the world around us using our 5 senses? So this lesson is called a sensory walk or sensory sit if you can't bring your students out on a walk. You simply ask students to be very present and use each of their 5 senses as appropriate to identify any problems they observed in their current setting. For those of you who teach one subject area, you might ask students to think about how their 5 senses could identify problems in that area or class. For example, what problems are you experiencing or noticing in science lab or Spanish class? Or perhaps ask students to seek out problems with their 5 senses that would require them to solve it with a particular set of skills. Here is a student handout that could support this lesson. Require students to list any of the problems that they found using their 5 senses during the sensory walk or sit. You might want to monitor what students taste though. I would tell my students just to taste the air so they don't lick anything gross. The last strategy invites teachers to develop students' sense of empathy. A variation of the previous activities includes a brainstorming technique called a bug list, developed by the Connecticut Invention Convention. The bug lists increase by level of challenge, and essentially a bug is anything that bothers, annoys, or irritates or challenges a person. When my students participated in the Invention Convention, I had them keep a journal for their bug list for about a week, and they wrote down everything that bugged them, except for homework and their siblings. Then at the end of the week, they selected their favorite bug to try and resolve. Now, my colleague from Renzulli Academy in Connecticut, Annalise Rios, and I tweaked this bug list idea and took our students on an empathy walk. In our Google Drive, I included an activity sheet to go along with this. We created this activity for use with elementary students, however, it can certainly be modified for older students in middle and high school. And here's how it worked. I would take students on a bug walk or a walk around the school building or outside, and they were given clipboards, a pencil, and a copy of the bug list. For about 15 minutes, they were to follow me as I led them throughout the building. While they walked, they applied their 5 senses and actively looked for problems that they observed that really bugged them. For example, squeaky doors, water fountains that just dribbled, lockers that won't close. After about 15 minutes, we stopped, gathered together as a group, and shared some of their bugs. Then we would retrace our steps back to class, but this time we embarked on the empathy part of the bug walk, and students would place themselves into the shoes of an individual with some type of disability and imagine what challenges they might experience or what might bug them as they go back to class. So this would be most effective if students did some reading first about an individual with a disability or actually interviewed them. Feel free to use this idea and the bug list posted in Canvas with your students and fellow teachers. All right, so we have come to the end of this section. Take a moment to reflect which strategies might work best with your students and how might you modify these strategies to work better with your students. If you are familiar with the CPS model and would like to know ways to modify it to make the process more challenging for your gifted students, I'd like to share some tips based on Maker and Cheever's qualitative modifications for a comprehensive curriculum for gifted students. Here are some example content differentiation modifications. First, you could add abstractness to your lesson plans. For example, more abstract problems to solve, such as community or global problems, complexity, or problems that have multiple components to them rather than one straightforward concrete problem. Organization for learning value. For example, any of your lessons or the problems that students select, maybe have them focus on a particular theme or concept. And then you could also infuse the study of people, as I've mentioned, famous or local or kid inventors, humanitarians, problem solvers, etc. If you use that modification, make sure students answer that question about how what they learned from these individuals could support their own learning. Here are some process modifications or the ways that you can have your students think as they go through the CPS model. Discovery is one where students could independently discover a problem to solve through exploration about a favorite topic instead of the teacher giving it to them or giving them all the answers. Evidence of reasoning. During any convergent thinking steps that require evaluations of ideas, ask students to justify their reasoning. Just don't do this during the divergent thinking step because we don't want to reduce student creativity. And then group interaction. Have students work in groups based on common interest and readiness levels. Here are some learning environment modifications. For example, complexity. Have students gather reading materials about their topic from a variety of sources. Have them move to different classrooms or different areas of the school building so that they can experience a little more freedom with high mobility. And then finally, just a couple last tips for developing CPS lessons. Tip number 1, students should apply the CPS to real-world problems. Provide direct instruction on how to generalize creativity skills to increase the likelihood of transfer, especially to contexts outside of students' talent areas. Research shows that this is really essential. Tip number 2, it's okay to start small and use an infusion approach. And tip number 3, remember to take on a facilitative role. The more that your students can think and do, the better. And then finally, tip number 4, establish a classroom culture that respects the creative process. Ensure that it is intelligence-friendly and creative-friendly. To wrap up, this presentation focused on the rationale for creative problem solving and seeking. I provided an overview of the creative problem-solving process model and shared 5 strategies to cultivate students' creative problem-seeking skills. I hope that you learned a lot. If you have any questions, please let me know. And here are the select references. Thank you everyone for joining us today.